thank you all for joining us and for taking the time to attend our webinar. So I'll kick off first and then followed by Professor Amos La. So I'm Mitchelle Holdsworth, based at the French National Research Institute for Development, currently based in Kenya. So what we'll cover today with Amos is 4 key questions. So first of all, we'll talk about what we mean by food environments, how they're changing and why does it matter. We'll also talk about some research we've undertaken in Ghana and Kenya, looking at the factors in people's lived food environments and how they influence their diets, and drawing on evidence, yes, in African cities. Amos will then move on and build on that by talking about which research methods can be used to investigate the different components of food environment, and also which policies and interventions can improve food environments in Africa. So I'll kick off with talking about what we mean by food environments. So I realize you can't see the detail of this, but I wanted just to really mention the fact that there are a number of different food models or food system and food environment models that have evolved over time. And it's really been the last 8 years that this kind of field of food environment research has kicked off. They all have different components, different ways of presenting the story, but in the end, they all encompass pretty much the same dimensions. And I wanted just to highlight, I suppose, the field of food environments. Sort of the definition and the approach started from 2 different perspectives. So from a sort of public health centric perspective first, back in 2013, when Boyd Swinburne defined food environments as the collective physical, economic, policy, and sociocultural surroundings, opportunities, and conditions that influence what people eat. And that was then followed by thinking more from probably economics and social science perspective and looking at food environment within the food systems. And that definition that's widely quoted is that food environments are the interface between acquiring food and consuming food within the wider food system. And what I would say is that these 2 separate fields have now kind of come together. And I think the most recent food systems dashboard model actually takes a more integrated approach. So I think that's a very good example of interdisciplinarity. But for the purposes of our work, we actually developed a framework using a socio-ecological model called the African Food Environments Framework, which this is based on. And the reason I'm using that is obviously because it came from the urban African food environment research, from systematic reviews, from original research we did, but also with widespread consultation for content validity with over 70 African-based researchers. And so within this, we're really looking at dividing food environments in quite a simple way, building on previous food environment models that were developed originally in the US by Mary Story. So at the center, you have the people, and their dietary behaviors, and then the individual factors that influence those. So that could be things like demographic factors, cognitions like knowledge and attitude, but also biological factors like age and sex. So for the purpose of today, we're not really interested in that because we're interested in the other 3 components that are really around the actual food environments. So this is divided up, first of all, into the social environment that an individual lives in. So they are influenced most often by family, friends, but also societal factors like social norms and social capital. Then that kind of social life is then happening within a physical environment. So here we have the 3 most common components of the physical environment that emerged within our African food environments framework as the most important in people's daily lives, that being the home, their neighborhood, and school. We actually found workplace to be very low on people's settings as a key setting to influence their diet. And then lastly, there's this sort of wide or broader macro level, sometimes called the policy level. And what we found, the key kind of categories of drivers were food prices, marketing, government policy, food industry, and climate as well. So here I'd like to explain why food environments changing matter. What we've seen is rapid demographic change within the African continent as well as globally, and that whether that be rural to urban migration or just the urbanization of smaller towns as well, has meant that food environments are rapidly changing as well. And why this matters to us who are in public health, it matters because of increasing risk then of obesity and non-communicable diseases coexisting with existing undernutrition. So if unhealthy food environments can promote unhealthy diets, then if we can develop interventions that actually promote healthy food environments, the idea is they have the potential to actually promote healthy diets as well. And if we look at the kind of urbanization pattern that we've seen globally, we can see in blue here that the urban population surpassed the rural population. I think back in around 2006. So these changing, there are lots of people exposed to urban food environments as a consequence. And the most recent data from 2024, which looked at the share of people living in urban areas, comparing here Africa with the world, you can see Africa's on the same trajectory of growth in terms of number of people proportion of people living in urban areas. So with this, urbanistic becomes a change in diet. And I'd like to just illustrate these different contexts that we see in this change in diet by using these three photographs from this book called Hungry Planet, What the World Eats, and that some of you may be familiar with. So this Peter Menzel, his photographer, asked families in quite a number of places throughout the world to take photographs of their weekly food consumption. And he took their photographs. And I think this illustrates very well, from a nutritionist point of view, what is here. What we see here is a low-income country. So we Mali in a rural area. And if you like, this is almost like a diet that is pre-transition. It's nearly all unprocessed foods. I think the only thing I could spot that is processed is this tin of concentrated tomato at the bottom. So it's also probably all locally sourced as well. Then if we move on to another context, so this is a middle income country now, and this is an urban context. So in Cairo, in Egypt, we can see this family still has a very good diversity of diet in terms of fruit and vegetables and unprocessed foods, but we can see a number of processed foods and drinks that have been integrated into the diet as well, particularly sugar-sweetened beverages and quite a number of salty products as well. And then the last photo is the example from a high-income country. So this is in the US. And what you can see here is that actually the vast majority of the foods consumed are processed and packaged. This is very typical of many high-income country settings, although there is a small amount of fresh unprocessed foods as well. So moving on to the second part, what is it that's actually, in terms of the general factors that are influencing people's diets in their food environments? And to answer this question, I'll draw on this two studies that Amos and I were involved in. They were conducted in Ghana and Kenya on the Dietary Transitions in African Cities project and the Drivers of Food Choice project. This was conducted by an interdisciplinary study team involving partners from Ghana, Kenya, the UK, and France. And it was funded by UK Aid and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation at the time. And we conducted the study in two deprived neighborhoods in three African cities. So we had two cities in Ghana and one city in Kenya. So in Ghana, it was the capital, Accra, and a larger provincial town, Ho, and then in Kenya, again, the capital city, Nairobi. And we did a number of different, we used a number of different methods, but the ones which I'll present to you today come from using photo voice and also the geographical mapping that we did. So I'll just explain a little bit about that. Um, so for those of you not familiar with photo voice, it's a kind of participatory photography, trying to really use the power of an image to help communities with expression, but also use it as a tool for advocacy and to try and affect change. So it aims to involve communities in decisions that affect them by using photography and to give them a voice or to amplify that voice to particular audiences. So in our project in Ghana and Kenya, we had 144 participants, which included males and females and adolescents and adults from age 13 onwards. So I'll also present a bit of data on the geographical mapping study I mentioned, which was also undertaken in the same communities where we basically assessed all food outlets in those communities, assessing the type, what food was sold, and any advertisements and the type of food advertised. Um, we actually assessed over 1,000 food outlets and adverts through this process. So now to the findings. So I'll start with the social environments. So the main findings here was summarized in a paper led by Milka Wanjohi. It's published in Public Health Nutrition a couple of years ago. And we found three main factors: emerging, family, friends, and then the social role of food vendors, which had been completely absent from models that were not conducted within the African region. So if I start by illustrating with some of the photographs that the participants took. So here we have a participant from Nairobi who chose his photograph and said, we eat together as a family. When we finish, we start talking as a family to discuss issues just to enhance the togetherness. So here you can see the importance of family in terms of influencing diets and how people eat. But we also saw children as influencers coming up in a number of our photographs. So here we have a woman again in Nairobi saying, these are my children eating githeri. It's their favorite and they make me cook it every time. In fact, we eat it 3 to 4 times a week. This is important because I value and love them, my children. Then friends emerged, particularly for adolescents, actually, as a very important group. And we had many photographs from adolescents of their friends. So this one's saying, this picture is for my friends, and you will see that there are times you find yourself, you do not have enough money. You will find from one of your friend volunteers to buy you food. If another day he doesn't have it, he'll be able to sort you out. So we saw that kind of social support as well from friends in terms of either sharing their lunch with them or actually lending money in many examples. And then this last category, of which we had many, many photographs of food vendors, which in the AfriFood Links project is an important context for our interventions, that kind of social role that food vendors play. So this participant in Accra said, for me, she's the most trusted food vendor around here. She's been serving us for a long time. So when you come, she knows what you want, what's good for your health, and she gives you that. And she's always at our service. So that idea of trust emerged quite a lot, and that mitigation of health risks from informal food vendors was a very strong factor. And that emerged quite a lot in the physical food environment. So here we had 4 key areas that emerged, or categories. So the availability and distance to food outlets, the food safety of vendors, home cooking and eating facilities, and then lastly, the availability of unhealthy food. And the findings from the physical food environment were published in a paper led by Rebecca Pradet in the Health and Place Journal. So firstly, around availability and distance, this participant mentioned that this food seller is close to me. The food's affordable. They sell yam and stew. By 12 p.m., the food is ready. The food is always hot, and that's how I like it. So here you can see in this one sentence, she's mentioned a number of factors that influence her. First of all, the proximity to where she lives, whether she can afford the food, the convenience, because the food is ready at the time she wants it, and it's also meets her food preference. She likes it too. As I mentioned, food safety was key. There's one picture here taken by a participant in Accra of, if you like, a less appealing food vendor. So she took this picture and said, I cannot go and buy sickness. I don't have enough money, and then I will go and buy food from a place which isn't safe to eat. If I fall sick, where will I get the money to go and treat the illness? And I think the fact that this emerged so many times showed to us there was very good understanding of the risk of eating out and food safety, but also quite a big awareness of not being able to always afford to be able to mitigate that risk and to eat elsewhere. We had here a picture on the other side of the scale, which was actually taken by a participant of a food vendor that she saw as preparing food safely. Here she's saying she covers her food with clean materials to prevent flies. When she's not selling, she tries to always clean the surroundings and the utensils. Because of that, I always like to buy food at her shop so I don't get stomach problems. And the issue of food hygiene also was represented in photographs at home. So this adolescent girl took this photograph saying how she was going to teach her mother to prepare food in a hygienic way by saying, before my mother starts cooking, I'm able to tell her to wash the vegetables before we start. I can teach my mum how to be hygienic in cooking the food. Also at home, we found that the cooking and eating facilities were important drivers of the food chosen. So here we have another adolescent taking this picture of her home, saying, since most of the things we used in cooking is outside, we will just eat outside, wash everything when we're done and pack them up. Dining table is not available, so this is the only place that we can eat. So we also found quite a lot of evidence of widespread availability of unhealthy food, and these data are from the paper or from the geographical mapping study. We actually found that sugar-sweetened beverages were available in over 40% of the different food outlets in all of 3 cities, which is more than I think we were expecting. This is an example of a photograph from the Ghana context. And then lastly, the macro level environment or the policy environment. So we identified factors, particularly around the cost of food and also food advertising. And this work was published in a journal led by Mark, in an article, sorry, published in BMJ Open, led by Mark Green. So we had many, many photographs of money by participants in all the cities. This one is an example from Ghana, where the participants saying, when you don't have enough money, you find it difficult to eat well. And really the idea or the issue of finance and socioeconomic status cuts across all the environmental levels and expresses itself in different ways. So in some ways, it's quite difficult to classify that here because of its cross-sectional nature. But we also have the findings around the marketing of sugar-sweetened beverages. We found in our mapping of marketing in those communities, we found that sugar-sweetened beverages were the most commonly advertised foods, and nearly half of all food adverts in the 3 cities were for sugar-sweetened beverages. And here we've got some examples from Ghana and Kenya in these photographs. After sugar-sweetened beverages, the next most common foods that were advertised were alcohol and milk, milk-related products. And then I'll finish my section with this slide. In terms of food advertising and how widespread it was in general, we found about a quarter of food outlets actually had food advertising on them. with posters being the most common. And here we've got examples from Ghana, and you can see, for example, the top right, the market has got widespread food advertising on actual food outlets themselves.